The house was quiet that night, except for the faint hum of a small black-and-white television. In the corner of a cramped living room in Gary, Indiana, a young boy sat on the floor, legs crossed, eyes wide, barely breathing. His name was Michael, 9 years old, shy, small, and still learning where his voice fit in a world already full of noise. But then, the television came alive. A man exploded onto the screen. James Brown. His feet moved faster than logic. His body snapped with rhythm. His voice roared through the speakers like fire. The crowd screamed, cried, fainted, but Michael didn't move. He didn't blink. He was hypnotized. Something in his chest tightened, a heartbeat syncing with the drums. He wasn't just watching James Brown, he was feeling him. Every shout, every spin, every drop to the floor. It was like watching a superpower being used in real time. Michael leaned forward, almost touching the screen. The electricity in James's performance wasn't just coming through the TV. It was reaching into Michael's soul. He could feel it, raw, alive, unstoppable. He whispered to himself under his breath, barely audible, "I want to do that." Outside, the world was asleep. Inside that small home, something cosmic had just begun. The boy who could barely reach the microphone was witnessing the birth of a calling. James Brown screamed his last note, sweat dripping, audience roaring, and the screen faded to static. But in that silence, something else was playing, the rhythm inside Michael's heart. He stood up slowly, trembling, his mind racing. He didn't know it yet, but that night had changed everything. He couldn't eat. He couldn't sleep, because now all he could see was that stage, and a voice inside whispering, "You belong there." No one in the Jackson house knew what had just happened. No one knew that this quiet boy had just seen his destiny on a flickering screen, and what he would do the very next morning would leave everyone speechless. Before the world called him a legend, before the bright lights and screaming fans, Michael Jackson was just a boy from Gary, Indiana. A small house, a large family, a father who believed in hard work and discipline more than tenderness. Joe Jackson didn't raise dreamers, he raised soldiers. Each of his sons held a guitar, a drumstick, or a microphone, but for Joe it was never about fun. It was about survival. Gary was a steel town. The air smelled of smoke and sweat. Kids grew up fast there, but Michael was different. While others played outside, he'd hum little melodies in corners, singing to himself as if the world was listening. His brothers noticed it too. That voice, high and pure, carrying emotions far too big for a child. At night, when the brothers practiced, Michael would sit nearby, watching closely. He'd mimic their steps, study their rhythm. Joe didn't pay him much attention yet. He was still the youngest, too small to command the stage, but there was something inside him, quiet, watchful, waiting. Music wasn't just sound to Michael. It was language. He could feel emotion in every beat, every lyric. His brothers laughed sometimes, called him the baby, but even they couldn't deny the spark he carried. Still, at 9 years old, he was just part of the background. Another Jackson kid with a dream too big for their living room. Until one night. That night when a voice came through the television unlike anything he had heard before. When James Brown, the godfather of soul, had screamed, danced, and demanded the audience's soul in return. Michael had seen singers. He had seen performers, but this was possession. James wasn't just moving to the music, he was becoming it. Every twitch of his body, every break in his voice was art in motion. Something deep inside Michael erupted. He didn't know it yet, but this was the exact moment that would divide his life into before and after. Before, the quiet boy watching from the sidelines. After, the child who would one day set the world on fire. The TV flickered off. The house went dark. His brothers went to sleep. But Michael lay in bed, eyes wide open, heart pounding, replaying every move in his head. Tomorrow, he thought. He had to try. Morning light poured through the curtains. Michael's eyes opened instantly, not with the sluggishness of a child, but with the purpose of someone on a mission. He didn't tell anyone what he'd seen. Didn't say a word at breakfast. But something was burning inside him. The memory of James Brown, alive in his bones. When the house quieted again, Michael walked to the mirror. It was cracked on one side, but to him it was a stage. He took a deep breath. Then he moved. At first it was awkward, his small feet tripping over each other, his hands out of rhythm. He spun too fast and stumbled, but then he stopped, closed his eyes, and listened. In his mind, the crowd roared, the band played, James shouted, "Get up off of that thing!" Michael tried again. This time, something different happened. His body found a rhythm that wasn't imitation. It was translation. What he had seen, he was now feeling. The spin, the shuffle, the drop. His body began to understand what his heart already knew. Minutes became hours. Sweat rolled down his forehead. His reflection blurred in the mirror, but his focus sharpened. The boy who once hid behind his brothers was now commanding an invisible stage. Then one of his brothers walked in, Jermaine. He froze, mouth open. "Mike, what are you doing?" Michael turned, breathless, a wild grin on his face. "I saw James Brown last night," Jermaine laughed, and until Michael moved again. He spun, stomped, and landed in rhythm so perfect it stunned him. Within moments, the others gathered. Tito, Jackie, Marlon, all staring as their little brother danced with a fire none of them had seen before. He was copying James Brown, but not quite. His moves had a strange precision, something more than mimicry. It was as if he was inventing while performing. Joe Jackson entered silent, his expression unreadable. He watched Michael for a full minute. Then, with a rare glint in his eye, he said softly, "Do that again." Michael did. Every beat sharper, every motion alive. When it ended, the room was silent, except for the sound of Michael's heavy breathing. Joe looked at his sons, then back at Michael. "This one," he said. "This one's special." And from that day forward, the rules of the Jackson household changed. The youngest was no longer just the baby of the family. He was the center, the heartbeat, the spark. But what no one realized yet, not even Michael himself, was that this was only the beginning, because the fire James Brown had lit was about to spread across the world. The morning after that fateful night felt different, like the air in the Jackson home had changed. Michael woke up early, long before the others. His body was tired from the hours he'd spent dancing the day before, but his mind was wide awake, still replaying every moment of James Brown's performance. He walked quietly through the house, barefoot on the cold floor, humming to himself. It wasn't a random tune. It was rhythm, control, pulse. Every step was in time. Every breath matched an invisible beat. The small living room that had once been just a place for practice suddenly felt too small for what was inside him. The energy was building, something he couldn't contain anymore. He began moving again, but this time it wasn't imitation. It was instinct. Each move had intention. A sharp stomp here, a slide there, a spin that stopped on a heartbeat. His arms snapped like lightning, his expression shifting with the music inside his head. For Michael, it wasn't about copying James Brown anymore. It was about feeling what James felt. He wanted to know what it was like to make people feel something, not just see it. He wanted to move like emotion had a body. The house creaked. Someone was awake. Tito peeked around the corner, still half asleep, confused at the sound of his younger brother's footsteps thumping against the floor. "What are you doing, Mike?" he mumbled. Michael didn't stop. He was lost in rhythm, face intense, sweat starting to gather. Tito stared for a moment, and then his confusion turned to awe. Michael's movements were precise, yet explosive. It was as if he wasn't just dancing to the beat, he was the beat. Within minutes, the others started coming out. Jermaine, Jackie, Marlon, all drawn by the strange noise echoing through their home. And there he was, their youngest brother, performing like a man possessed. No stage. No music, no audience, just raw energy. The brothers watched silently as Michael dropped into a split, popped up, spun around, and froze, his eyes locked on them. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Jermaine whispered, How did you do that? Michael shrugged, panting. I just felt it. They laughed at first, thinking he was playing. But the laughter faded as he repeated it. Perfectly. Again and again. Each time sharper, smoother, more magnetic. He was no longer practicing. He was transforming. When Joe Jackson entered the room, everyone went silent. He stood in the doorway, watching. He wasn't a man who praised easily. His eyes scanned Michael's movements, the rhythm, the timing, the control. Finally, he said in his low, gravelly voice, "Again!" Michael obeyed, and as he moved, Joe's expression shifted from surprise to calculation. He saw something he'd never seen before. Not just talent, but command, stage presence. When Michael finished, breathing hard, Joe nodded slowly. "That," he said, "is what I've been waiting for." The room was heavy with silence. The brothers exchanged glances. They didn't fully understand it, but they knew. Something had changed forever. That morning, the Jackson family had witnessed the birth of something extraordinary. A boy inspired by a legend had turned imitation into innovation. A spark had become a flame. And as Joe walked out of the room, he said the words that would define the next chapter of all their lives. "Get ready, boys. We're going to show the world what we've got." No one could have imagined how literal that promise would become. For Michael, the next few months would be a storm. Practice, perfection, and performances that would turn whispers into headlines. But for now, he just stood there, staring into the same mirror that had witnessed his transformation. He didn't see a child anymore. He saw possibility, and somewhere deep inside, he could still hear James Brown's voice echoing, "Get up off of that thing." Michael smiled, because he already had. In the Jackson household, competition wasn't a game, but it was survival. Each brother had his strength. Tito played guitar with discipline. Jermaine sang with smoothness. Jackie had presence. But now all eyes were turning toward the smallest of them all, Michael. At first, his brothers didn't quite know how to feel. They loved him, but they could sense something shifting. Joe Jackson was giving him the longest hours, the hardest feedback, the most attention. The spotlight, once shared, was beginning to focus. During rehearsals, Michael's natural timing began taking over the group's rhythm. If someone missed a beat, Joe didn't correct them. He told them to watch Michael. The boy who had once followed was now leading, and it wasn't arrogance. It was instinct. Michael didn't just dance to music. He danced through it. The Jackson Five began performing more locally. Small stages, community halls, schools. At first, audiences were polite. But every time Michael opened his mouth or took a step forward, the room would shift. Gasps, cheers, laughter, the kind of reaction that couldn't be taught. Even at 9, he could command a crowd like a grown man. He'd drop to his knees mid-song, throw his arm out dramatically, and people would scream. Joe would watch from the side, arms crossed, nodding. He knew what this meant. This was the breakthrough. But among the brothers, it wasn't that simple. Jermaine, once considered the group's frontman, began feeling the weight of change. In late-night talks, he'd confessed to Tito, "Man, I love Mike, but it's like he's becoming something else, something we can't keep up with." Tito would nod quietly, knowing it was true. Because when Michael performed, time stopped. He wasn't mimicking James Brown anymore. He was channeling something far deeper. The boys began adding routines around his energy. Michael in the center, brothers orbiting him. Joe noticed it too. "This kid," he'd say, "has it. The rest of you follow him." It stung, but even they couldn't deny it. When Michael sang, everything worked. One night after rehearsal, Joe gathered them in the living room. He paced back and forth, hands behind his back. "You boys have something," he said, "but you're not using it right. People don't want perfect. They want fire. They want heart." He turned to Michael. "You've got that fire. You lead. The rest of you build around him." The decision was made. Michael was now the front man. The room was silent. No applause, no smiles. Just realization. They practiced again, but this time, something was different. Michael stood front and center, microphone in hand, his brothers behind him. The music started. He took a deep breath, and then it happened. The voice that came out wasn't the small sound of a child. It was powerful, commanding, emotional. It filled the room. The brothers froze for a moment, stunned. Even Joe's usual frown softened into something almost like pride. When the song ended, Michael looked around nervously. He didn't want to outshine anyone. He just wanted to be part of the music. But Jermaine walked up to him, put a hand on his shoulder, and said quietly, "You got it. Mike, you really got it." Michael smiled, shy, humble, unaware of the history he was about to create. Outside, the steel mills of Gary roared as they always did. Life was still hard, still uncertain. But inside that small home, a miracle was forming. The Jackson 5 was no longer just a family band. It was a force, and it all started with a boy who couldn't stop dancing after seeing James Brown on TV. But this new spotlight came with a price: endless rehearsals, sleepless nights, and the burden of being perfect. Because Joe Jackson wasn't raising a singer anymore. He was creating a phenomenon. And as the boys practiced late into the night, with Michael leading every beat, every spin, every shout, one truth began to settle in. The boy who once looked up to James Brown was now walking the path to become someone even greater. But with every new level of greatness comes pressure. And soon, that pressure would test not just his talent, but his soul. The transformation was now unstoppable. The Jackson 5 were no longer just 5 brothers from Gary. They were becoming something that couldn't be contained by the walls of their home. And at the heart of it all was a boy with eyes that burned. Brighter than any spotlight, Joe Jackson could sense it. The moment Michael stepped forward, everything clicked. The rhythm was sharper, the harmonies tighter, the energy electric. The audience didn't just listen anymore. They felt it. In every performance, Michael began taking small chances. A twist here, a sudden spin there, a glance at the crowd that sent shivers through the room. It wasn't planned. It wasn't rehearsed. It was instinct. And every time he did it, the reaction was instant. The crowd would roar. Joe noticed that too. He didn't show emotion easily, but deep down he knew. Michael had something even he couldn't control. At rehearsals, Joe pushed harder than ever. The brothers practiced for hours long after sunset. Mistakes weren't tolerated. Missed notes meant repetition. But Michael never complained. Where others grew tired, he seemed to grow stronger. He didn't just want to perform, he wanted to perfect. During one late-night session, as exhaustion filled the room, Joe's voice thundered, "Again!" The brothers groaned. Michael didn't. He looked at his father and said softly, "Okay, Daddy." Then he began to sing, and something changed. It wasn't just the notes, it was the emotion behind them. Every line carried weight, pain, hunger. His small body moved like it was channeling something ancient, something divine. For a moment, even Joe was silent. When the music stopped, the air felt heavy, charged. Joe simply nodded once and said, "That's how you lead." The next weekend, they played a small club in Gary. The crowd was rough, not easy to impress. But when Michael took the stage, everything else disappeared. He opened his mouth, and it was as if time itself paused. The child's voice carried the conviction of a grown man. The crowd leaned forward, drawn in. And when he danced, they erupted. People began whispering to each other. "Who is that kid? What's his name? Where did he come from?" Word spread quickly. A little boy who could sing like an angel and move like James Brown was performing in the steel town of Gary. Within weeks, small gigs turned into bigger ones. Talent scouts began appearing at the back of the crowd. Michael didn't see them. He didn't care. He wasn't chasing fame. He was chasing that feeling. The same one he'd felt when James Brown first appeared on his TV screen. Every performance was a chance to reach it again. That fire. That electricity. But with each new success, Joe's pressure grew heavier. "Don't mess up. Don't stop moving. Don't let them see weakness." Michael obeyed. Because deep down he knew this was just the beginning. He wasn't just singing for applause anymore. He was building something larger than himself. He could feel destiny's hands guiding him, pushing him forward. And yet somewhere inside, a quiet voice whispered, "If I can move them like James Brown moved me, Maybe I can change the world too. But destiny always asks for more than inspiration. And soon the world would demand everything from him. As the months passed, Michael's transformation turned into mastery. He studied every movement James Brown ever made, every shout, every glide, every explosion of emotion. But he didn't just copy. He experimented. When James spun once, Michael spun twice. When James dropped to one knee, Michael turned it into a slide. When James shouted from his soul, Michael turned it into a melody. He was no longer chasing James Brown. He was evolving beyond him. Music became his universe. Every sound had a rhythm. Every silence had meaning. He would stand in front of the mirror for hours, replaying a move until it felt like breathing. The mirror wasn't showing a boy anymore. It was reflecting an artist in the making. Even Joe, who never gave easy praise, began to realize that Michael wasn't just a performer. He was a phenomenon, but Michael didn't think in those terms. He didn't think about fame, about headlines, or about money. All he wanted was to feel the music, to live inside it. Sometimes, after long rehearsals, his brothers would collapse on the couch, too tired to move. But Michael would stay standing, drenched in sweat, his mind still locked on rhythm. Jermaine would shake his head and say, "Mike, you're crazy, man. Don't you ever get tired?" Michael would just laugh softly. "I can rest when the music stops." But the music never stopped. He began shaping his own identity. Small things at first. A unique spin here. A sudden freeze mid-step. Little moments that made the audience gasp. He was learning how to command time. When he performed, he could make a crowd breathe with him, inhale when he paused, exhale when he exploded into motion. He was building the tools that would one day make the world call him the king. Yet in his heart, he still remembered the beginning, the tiny living room, the flickering TV, and that one man who started it all. In interviews years later, Michael would say, "James Brown was the one who made me want to perform. I saw what he could do and I thought, that's what I want to do with my life." But what James didn't know back then was that his fire had sparked another flame, one that would burn brighter and longer than anyone could imagine. Back in Gary, things were changing fast. Local fame turned into state attention. Then came the whispers. Motown is watching. Motown. The holy land of soul music. The empire of sound. Joe's eyes lit up with ambition. He knew if he could get his boys, especially Michael, in front of Motown, everything could change. The family's living room became a factory of perfection. Every note, every harmony, every step, drilled endlessly, and though the others grew weary, Michael thrived. Every repetition brought him closer to something, the version of himself he was meant to be. He no longer danced like a boy inspired by James Brown. He danced like a soul, becoming one with rhythm. Late one night, after another grueling rehearsal, Joe turned off the record player and said, "You boys better rest. Big things are coming." But Michael stayed behind. He looked into the mirror once more. His reflection stared back, small, tired, but burning. He whispered quietly, "One day, they'll see what I feel." Then he smiled, that same innocent, unstoppable smile that would soon melt millions of hearts. He had no idea how close he was. No idea that his next performance would put him on a collision course with destiny, because soon a man from Motown Records would walk through those doors. And when he saw Michael perform, he would know. The future of music had just walked into the room. The year was 1969. America was changing. Music, politics, culture, everything was in motion. And in the middle of it all, a small group of brothers from Gary, Indiana, were about to make history. Motown Records, home of legends like Stevie Wonder. Diana Ross and the Temptations had finally signed the Jackson 5, but nobody, not even Berry Gordy himself, could have predicted what was about to happen. Backstage, before their first major television performance, the brothers were nervous. It was their debut, their shot at the big time. Cameras, lights, the world watching. But Michael? He wasn't nervous. He was buzzing, because inside his head, that old black and white image of James Brown still burned. The fire that had started years ago in that tiny living room was now ablaze. He stood in front of the mirror, brushing off his jacket, whispering, "Watch me. Mr. Brown, this one's for you." The band started. The Jackson 5 hit the stage. And then, boom. The opening notes of "I Want You Back" shook the studio. The audience leaned forward, unsure what to expect. And then Michael opened his mouth. That voice, clear, soulful, far beyond his years, exploded through the speakers. Every lyric hit with confidence. Every move was electric. It wasn't just a performance. It was an eruption. He spun, dropped to his knees, popped up with the precision of a dancer twice his age. His timing was flawless, his energy contagious. It was as if James Brown's spirit had been reborn in this little boy, but with something new, innocence wrapped in fire. When the song ended, the crowd didn't just clap. They roared. It was instant. America had just witnessed a new kind of performer, a child who danced like a storm and sang like a soul possessed. Backstage, Motown's executives were stunned. Berry Gordy turned to his team and whispered, "That kid, he's not just good. He's the future." And the future came fast. Within months, the Jackson 5 became a phenomenon. ABC, "I'll Be There," "The Love You Save," hit after hit. Every stage they stepped on, Michael lit up like a firecracker. He didn't just perform songs. He told stories with his body. He felt every beat like it was pulsing straight from his soul. But privately, Michael kept thinking about James Brown. He studied every performance, every sound, every shout. He would tell his brothers, "See how he drops and comes up? Watch his timing. He never misses the beat." And yet there was something else in his tone, something deeper. Respect, reverence, love. He knew he owed everything to that first spark, the night he saw James Brown move like lightning on a TV screen. But he also knew he couldn't stay in anyone's shadow forever. To truly honor his hero, Michael had to become more than a copy. He had to become his own revolution. So night after night, show after show, he began adding small touches, tiny movements, new rhythms. He was experimenting, shaping a style that was familiar yet completely new. James Brown had inspired him. But Michael was about to do something no one, not even James, had ever done. He was about to turn inspiration into transformation, and fate was watching closely, because the day was coming when these two souls, teacher and student, legend and prodigy, would finally meet face to face. And when that moment came, the entire world would feel it. Cliffhanger. What happens when the man who started it all sees the boy who took his spirit and amplified it beyond imagination? It happened many years later. Michael was no longer the child star from Gary. He was now the king of pop, a global icon. His name whispered with awe from Tokyo to London to Los Angeles. He had done it all, sold out tours, record-breaking albums, a fan base unlike anything in history. But beneath the glitter and glory, he still carried one memory, the night that changed everything. And now, he was about to come full circle. It was 1983, and James Brown was performing live in Beverly Hills. The crowd was wild. Celebrities, musicians, and fans packed the venue, waiting to see the godfather of soul bring down the house. James walked onto the stage, sharp as ever, microphone in hand. The horns hit, the bass thumped, and he tore through his set like a man half his age. Even after decades, he was still the master. But then, near the end of the show, James looked out into the crowd and smiled. He could sense something. Someone. A familiar face in the audience. It was Michael. James stopped mid-song, pointed at him, and said into the mic, "Ladies and gentlemen, I got my man Michael Jackson in the house tonight." The crowd erupted. Every camera turned. Michael smiled shyly, trying to wave it off, but James wasn't done. "Come on up here, Michael. Let the people see you." The audience went insane. Michael hesitated for a split second, then stood up and walked toward the stage. And that walk was historic. As he climbed the steps, the two men locked eyes. For a moment, the noise faded. James grinned, half proud, half amazed. And Michael bowed slightly, like a student greeting his master. Then James shouted, "Hit it!" The band kicked in, the rhythm exploded, and before anyone knew it, Michael was dancing. not rehearsed, not planned. Pure instinct. He moved with precision and grace, every step a tribute, but every move his own. James laughed, clapping along, shaking his head in disbelief. Then, out of nowhere, Michael did it, the smooth spin, the effortless glide, the split, the rise, every motion echoing James Brown's energy, yet transcending it. It was as if time had folded in on itself, past and future sharing one heartbeat. The crowd was losing their minds. And in the middle of it, James grabbed the mic again. "Wait, wait, wait! We got another brother in the house tonight, Mr. Prince." The audience gasped. Prince walked on stage, guitar slung across his shoulder, smirking in that mysterious way only he could. 3 eras of music, Brown, Jackson, Prince, now stood side by side under one spotlight. It wasn't just a concert anymore. It was a coronation. James, the Godfather. Michael, the Prince turned king. Prince, the rebel prodigy. Each feeding off the other's energy, pushing the boundaries of what performance could be. For a few unforgettable minutes, it was more than music. It was lineage, spirit passing from one soul to another. The torch of rhythm, showmanship, and soul itself. And when it ended, James Brown leaned close to Michael and whispered something that only a few people nearby heard. "You took it, son. And you made it your own." Michael smiled, eyes glistening. "You taught me how to dream," he said softly. That night wasn't just a performance. It was the closing of a circle. The little boy who once watched a black and white television now standing beside the man who had unknowingly shaped his destiny. And though James Brown passed away years later, Michael never forgot that night. In interviews, he often called him the greatest entertainer ever. But the truth was deeper, because without James Brown, there might never have been a Michael Jackson. And without Michael Jackson, the world might never have understood what James Brown truly started. The mentor inspired the student, and the student redefined the world. Cliffhanger for final part. But what did that lifelong influence cost Michael? The price of chasing perfection that began with one childhood dream. The answer would come not in his fame, but in his final years, when the boy who once danced for joy would struggle under the weight of his own legend. Fame had arrived like a tidal wave. But what the world celebrated as magic, Michael Jackson's flawless dance, that effortless moonwalk, that unshakable rhythm, was built on a lifetime of invisible battles. Because from the moment he first whispered, "I can do it better," in that small house in Gary, Indiana, Michael's life had never been his own again. The very spark that lifted him from obscurity also burned him from within. As the world screamed his name, Michael carried a secret pain. He was chasing not applause, but approval. The echo of his father's harsh training, the ghost of endless rehearsals, and the voice inside his head that whispered, "One more time." It has to be perfect. Perfection had become both his gift and his curse. He would watch old James Brown tapes late at night, still studying, still learning, decades after his first success. It wasn't competition anymore, it was obsession. James Brown had once told him, "Never let them see you tired." And Michael took that to heart. Even when he was breaking inside, he smiled. Even when he was lonely beyond words, he danced. And even when he could no longer find peace, he chased the rhythm that had once set him free. Because for Michael, stopping meant fading. And fading meant death. In interviews, he would speak softly about his idol. "James Brown showed me what it means to give your all. When you perform, you leave everything on that stage. And that's exactly what he did. Every tour, every concert, every heartbeat. He gave himself away, piece by piece, until there was almost nothing left, but something profound was happening beneath the surface." Michael was no longer just the boy inspired by James Brown. He had become the bridge between eras, the link between the soul of the past and the spectacle of the future. What James Brown had done with raw energy and fire, Michael transformed into artistry and myth. The spins became smoother. The footwork became poetry. The scream became a symphony. He didn't just imitate greatness. He evolved it. And yet in private moments, when the lights were off and the stage was empty, that same boy from Gary would resurface. He'd sit in silence, whispering old melodies, remembering that night when the world first shifted for him. The night James Brown showed him what was possible. When James Brown passed away in 2006, Michael attended his funeral. Standing over the casket, tears in his eyes, he whispered words that only those closest could hear. "You were my greatest teacher." It wasn't the voice of a global icon speaking to a legend. It was the voice of a student thanking his first and only master. The cameras flashed, the world mourned, but for Michael it was something deeper. It was the closing of a story that had begun in childhood, a story that defined everything he became. In the years that followed, Michael often talked about how deeply James's energy lived in him. "When I dance," he once said, "I can still feel him. Like he's right there, pushing me forward." And maybe that was true, because even when his own world began to crumble, when fame became a cage, when isolation consumed him, when the public turned cruel, he never lost that spark, that unstoppable need to move. He danced through pain. He sang through heartbreak. He lived through rhythm, and that rhythm, it all came from that one moment. A 9-year-old boy watching a legend on television, realizing that greatness wasn't magic, it was passion, soul, and sacrifice. The night before his passing in 2009, Michael was rehearsing again. He was preparing for his comeback tour. This is it. Even at 50, his body worn, his voice tired, he refused to slow down. His crew said he was radiant that night, focused, laughing, even moonwalking across the floor as if time had never touched him. And when he finished, he looked up and said softly, "That was good. Let's do it one more time." Those were some of his last words on stage, and in them you could still hear the echo of that child's voice, the one who once stayed up all night, barefoot and fearless, dancing in front of a flickering TV light. He began as a student of James Brown. He became the teacher of the world. Every pop star who came after him, every dancer, every dreamer, owed something to that moment of awe. Because Michael Jackson didn't just follow in James Brown's footsteps. He expanded the path. He turned inspiration into innovation, movement into meaning, music into immortality. And yet, when you strip away the fame, the fortune, the myths, the controversy, you're left with something heartbreakingly simple. A boy who saw something beautiful once and spent his entire life trying to live up to it. That's why his story endures. Because it isn't just about talent, it's about devotion. About the way a spark of inspiration can alter the course of human history. Even now, decades later, if you listen closely, when a dancer slides across the stage, when a crowd gasps at a perfect spin, when music lifts your soul just a little higher, you can feel them both. James Brown. And the boy who watched him. One man passed the torch. The other turned it into fire. And that fire still burns today. Final reflection. Sometimes greatness isn't born in spotlight. It's born in silence. In the quiet awe of a child watching his hero and whispering, "I can do that." That whisper became a promise. That promise became a legend. And that legend became the heartbeat of modern music. James Brown created the rhythm. Michael Jackson gave it wings, and together, they changed the world forever.